It's an honor and a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to you guys today. It's typically a tradition at these things to tell a joke, you know, when you start these kind of speeches, and I thought through my repertoire of jokes and none of them are actually appropriate in mixed company. So I asked my 4-year-old son if he knew a joke that I could tell today, and so he gave me a joke, and he said, "What does a cow do for fun?" He goes to the movies. There you go. I give that one up to Miro. So normally I stand up in front of groups like this and I talk in pretty good detail about my conservation tillage system and how I developed the system and what it does and what has been the effect of it and how it's changed the way we farm and promote systems and, you know, starting with the end of mine and all this kind of stuff. But today I'm going to do something a little different. It's a little bit of a step back from what I normally do. And I'm just going to start off by giving you a little bit of my story and how I got to where I'm at right now, because it kind of plays a role in how I ended up getting involved in CT and whatnot. So I grew up on the farm, you know, milking cows, feeding calves, driving tractor, just like any other farm kid. I was involved in 4-H and FFA. Went on to College of Sequoias and was involved in ag there. Went to Cal Poly. Did agriculture there, and then I came back to the farm again, just like most other farm kids in my area do. I'm a Swiss Italian. I'm descended from 4th generation Swiss immigrants, and Swiss people are very stubborn and they like to fight a lot. And I watched my father and my grandfather fight constantly, and I didn't want to have that same relationship, so I left. And I didn't really have any marketable skills, so I became a manager of rock bands and and ended up traveling around the country and around the planet, managing tours and trying to promote music for a bunch of different rock bands. And I turned 30 while I was on this particularly long stint, which was a year and a half straight on the road with no days off, and I was getting a little tired of it and decided I was too old for that business, so I moved to San Francisco and started a software company. And this was in 1998, which was at the very kind of beginning of the big push in the internet boom. It was kind of the mid-bubble period, we would kind of call it. And we got into internet application development, myself and 4 of my partners, and we lived in a big house in San Francisco, and we developed applications for corporations who were trying to extend whatever, you know, they already had to create an internet presence. And so the technology of the internet was very young, and it was changing at a rapid pace. I mean, literally daily there was new software and new ideas, and nobody really knew what the internet was and what it was supposed to do. At that time, everybody thought it was basically a moving billboard, and it was all about advertising. And then they thought that it's kind of this integrated thing, and that what people want is to go to some website where they can buy every possible kind of toilet paper that exists in one place, right? They want huge variety. So toiletpaper.com, which is actually something that we built, we had 800 varieties of toilet paper that people could go there and buy. Well, we know that people don't actually want that. They want one place to go and buy everything, like at Amazon.com. So my father got sick, and so I moved back to the farm to watch out for things for a while, and I got stuck there and ended up getting back into farming. And after having about a 13-year period between when I left farming and came back, I had to relearn it. And the only way I knew how to work at that time was to start by looking at what's the most current information, the most current technology, look at how the industry is changing and try to anticipate the change and be in front of the change instead of being behind the change, because that's the only way you can survive in the software world. And so what I discovered was conservation tillage. And so I embarked on a little bit of a mission to try to learn about conservation tillage. We did a few acres. It actually started with my father, who despises welfare. and always complains about, you know, single mothers on welfare, but he loves going down to the NRCS office and collecting welfare money from the government. You know, it's, I mean, if there's a dollar to be had at the NRCS office, my dad was down there trying to figure out a way to get it. And so there was a grant. It was $30 an acre to try to reduce passes in the field. And so we were awarded that grant on 30 acres, and so I had to figure out how to do that. And in the process, I discovered no-till, and that didn't work very well, so we then went on to strip-till, and that's developed into the system that we have going today. So I'm going to give you just a brief description of my system and kind of to compare my old system with my new one like I normally do, then go on to something else. A year or so ago, I tried to do something a little unusual, which was to get into overhead irrigation. And I learned only one lesson in overhead irrigation, and that is don't park your truck in front of the pivot. And so that was the end of my, my overhead irrigation experience. So my conservation tillage system criteria was that it had to be economically sustainable, maintain or increase yield, reduce inputs, and reduce emissions. And so that was kind of the foundation for a system. We put the system together, and what we're operating now, it pretty much meets that system criteria. This is just an example of the conventional inputs, and I won't go through them. You know, let me go back. We're double cropping wheat and corn. Everything we grow is fed to the cows. I should have told you I'm a dairyman. I skipped the whole part about that. I live in Hanford. My family's been farming in the same place for 118 years. We grow 900 acres of irrigated, flood irrigated row crops, everything. In alfalfa, everything we grow goes to the cows. So in previous years, it would take 12 passes in the field to go from wheat to corn in our typical rotation process. Then we'd go from corn to wheat, and there'd be a couple more passes, which would bring us to 17 total passes in the field. In our conservation tillage program, from wheat to corn, we went with strip tilling, which is one dirt moving pass, and then, you know, 4 with planting and spraying and whatnot, 4 passes. From corn to wheat, another 4, so we were at 8 passes. And what that works out to is a difference of 11 dirt moving passes per year versus 1 strip till pass, which is about a half a pass of dirt moving, and 1 disc. And to be honest with you, the only reason why we even disc before the wheat is because we have to incorporate the manure. And you know, we save the manure from the dairy, we compost it all summer long, we apply it to the ground before the wheat, expecting that it will break down more and be available for the corn in the spring. And we've tried some work leaving the manure on top of the soil. Doesn't work very well. So at this point in my normal presentation, I asked this question, you know, what's the holdup? So if conservation tillage can reduce all these passes, and I left out some slides, you know, I usually say that I've actually increased yields. All of my, when I switched over to 100% CT, at that time, all of my CT fields were out yielding my conventional fields by 5 tons of the acre of corn silage. So if you look at, you know, reducing all these passes and less equipment to own, and like Tom Barcelos likes to say, I'm never changing another cultivator bearing again, but I bet you're changing a lot of points on those strip tillers. I do that a lot. And so what's the holdup? If CT is so great and it's less work and it's more money, why aren't people doing it? And the answer to that is kind of the basis of the presentation going forward. And the old way I used to describe this is that in California, we have basically been the most spoiled, lazy farmers in the history of the planet. We've got everything we need to grow crops here, right? We've got the weather, a long growing season. We've got all the water we need, and it's cheap, right? We don't have any problems with water in California. At least we didn't. Now we have a little bit of problem with California. We got all the labor we need in California, and it's ultra cheap and easy. We don't have to, you know, pay them very much. There's hardly any regulation. Lawsuits and unions are not a problem, right? So we don't worry about that kind of thing. That's the way it used to be. Diesel was cheap, right? I mean, you're paying 80 cents a gallon for diesel. So what's the big deal if you go out there and make a 10 more passes in the field to get it the way you like. I mean, who's paying 80 cents for diesel today? Tom, when's the last time you paid 80 cents for diesel? Yeah, so it wasn't very long ago. And it's going to be pretty soon before I'm back in them again, so hopefully diesel will come down. You know, we live in this pristine valley. There's no pollution, no smog. You know, water quality is perfect. We don't have any problems with regulators. We don't have any government pushback. You know, it's all just perfect, right? Well, not anymore. Ethanol, you know, I put this up here, and this is really a symbol of government manipulation of markets, right? This isn't about ethanol. It's about government forcing an idea of what a market should do. And so we're not really in a free market, so to speak. The markets are pushing us where to go. And then we used to have this very favorable relationship with government. And, you know, I mean, probably 50 years ago, half the legislators in California were probably farmers. You know, we're probably one generation off the farm. Now we've got one. And, you know, he's moving to Washington, so we're going to have none. You know, we had this Republican governor who gave us the worst environmental regulation that this country has ever seen. And then we got our friend Dean Flores over here, who everybody probably knows. And I like this little thing that says, investing in California's future. And I added to that, devastating California's future. So, you know, we have all of these things kind of lined up against us. So I gave these presentations. This was a slide that I built 5 years ago when I first started getting into this, and I just killed it. What did I do here? I bumped it. Let's see if it'll come back on. So I started doing this 5 years ago, and here we are 5 years later, and things haven't really changed all that much. You know, I don't know if Jeff showed a slide of the adoption of conservation tillage. I've seen the slide, you know, in California, where it's like this, boom, and it looks pretty steep. It's ramping up pretty fast. But when you look at it on a percentage basis of all the land, it's really still insignificant. So, you know, I'm nearly the only one in my county that's doing it. You know, and I'm kind of the ground zero. You know, it's like where everybody comes to see it. But yet my neighbors near me haven't adopted the practices. I mean, a couple of them have. And one way to describe this is, I'm going to tell a little story about the last conversation I had with my father. I'll see if I could do it. My father passed away in August of this year, and he was never a fan of this program. Even though he saw year after year, he'd drive down the road and he'd go, you know, that corn looks a lot better than I expected it would look. You know, and then I would take him and show him these numbers. Look, Dad, we got 35 tons to the acre on this strip till field, and here's one that made 40 tons to the acre. And, you know, and his high was 30 before that. And, you know, he said, it's not going to work. You're still going to have to go back to rip. Eventually, you're going to have to rip. And 7 years into this thing, even in the 7th year, he said, you're going to have to rip. And I'm like, well, when am I going to have to rip, right? And so the last conversation we had, unfortunately, was he was going through these series of strokes and we didn't know about it. And he called me up one Sunday morning and just laid into me and complained about every single thing he hated about the way I farm. And then the next day he passed away. That was the last conversation we ever had, believe it or not. And so it's causing me a lot of thinking about why is it that deeply ingrained? How is it that we can't give up those ideas? And it reminds me of this quote from Abe Lincoln that I've had as my email signature for a number of years, and I've almost stopped paying attention to it until just recently. And I'll read it for you. It says, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. And it's the idea of disenthralling ourselves or falling out of love with these old traditions and ideas that we're clinging to so tightly. It's almost like we're having this clinging to your guns and Bibles, you know, idea versus a more progressive idea. And so, so I decided instead of talking about farming today, I'm going to talk about Kodak. George Eastman started Kodak in 1889, somewhere back in the state that I always fly over. And he started this company with a razor and blade strategy of selling inexpensive cameras and making large margins from consumables like film, chemicals, and paper. And they did a pretty damn good job of it. In 1976, Kodak owned 90% of the US market for film and 85% of the US market in cameras. And last week, they went bankrupt. So why? Why did Kodak go bankrupt?
Lack of innovation.
Did they not innovate? That's what I thought when I first started looking at this. I thought Kodak missed the digital train. Did Kodak miss the digital train? They invented the digital train. In 1975, Kodak invented the digital camera. Kodak owns like 80% of the world's patents for digital photographic technology. They invented the first consumer digital camera, which was put out by Apple, called the QuickTake 100. And by 2005, they were the #1 seller of digital cameras in the United States. And that's not that long ago, 2005. So what happened? What did they not do? How could they be the leader for a century in technology and fall off the cliff so fast? Charles Darwin said it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Kodak thought they were changing, right? They were the leaders. They were out front. They spent billions of dollars researching and developing. So they innovated in technology. They're still the technology innovators in digital. But they kept their same business model. They stayed the razor and blade company trying to sell cheap cameras and making their money on expensive ink and paper. And then Facebook and Apple killed them because nobody prints pictures. I want to survey the audience. How many of you have ever owned an Apple product, a Kodak product in your life? Raise your hand and hold them up if you've ever owned a Kodak product in your life. Okay, how many of you, keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. How many of you have bought a Kodak product in the last 2 years? Okay, so just a very small amount. How many of you how many of you still print pictures? Print pictures, yep, quite a few. How many of you print every picture you take? Yeah, none. So you can see the problem. So Kodak was enthralled with the razor blade and the razor and blade model. And it wasn't their lack of innovating, it was their lack of understanding the world and how the world was changing in ways that they couldn't see. In fact, there was a time in the early 2000s after 9/11 when the film sales had dropped off a lot for Kodak. I'm stuck on Apple now. And Kodak attributed it to the downturn in the economy because of the tragedy that happened in New York. And a couple years later, it was still slipping. So even though they were innovating and leading the charge for digital, they spent 10 times the money that they normally spend trying to promote film to slow the adoption of digital. They actually they were leading digital, but they actually spent money to try to fight it. So what is ag enthralled with, right? So what is it that we are enthralled with that gets in the way of our ability to view these kind of changes that are happening around us? I would say tradition is one. I mean, I'm a 4th generation farmer. Most of the farmers that are in this room are multi-generation farmers. My dad did it some way, his dad did it some way. We've been doing it this way forever. And that's kind of one of the things what I really realized about my dad and why he was so mad about the way I changed all his stuff. And he actually said this to me many times. He's like, everything I've ever done, you've undone. And I realized that that's really what he had to measure himself with, right? I mean, this is the measure of his successes, right? It's like what he's done on the dairy that was different than his dad. And that's really, and at the same time, he talked about how he changed everything his dad did, but was upset that I changed his stuff. So, independence is something we like. We don't like people telling us what to do. We kind of want to do our own thing. Risk aversion is an issue. People are afraid to take risk, try something new. Part of that is because they're afraid of what the neighbor thinks. What's the neighbor got to say if I have a crop failure or if the field looks bad, so they're not going to try it. They want freedom to operate. They don't want the government involved in what they're doing, but hypocritically, they want payments from the government, right? So all this basically equates to a major resistance towards change. But this model has worked so far, right? Up to now, we've been farming for what, at least 10 years in this country. Probably, a lot longer than that. So why is it different now, right? Why now is it different? Well, I'll just let this thing play out. We have a little bit different attitude by people about food and where the food comes from and how we produce it. We're in a battle against influencers who have a different view of agriculture. So the question is, who are going to be the people who are going to be the thought leaders for the future of agriculture? Is it going to be people from speaking on the TED presentations? Has anyone ever heard of the TED presentations? Who knows about TED? Okay, so if you don't know about TED, TED is this annual conference called Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And it's generally thought of as this kind of the big thinkers of our world come together to give you 18 minutes of the most important crap you'll ever hear, right? And so it's kind of got this stigma, and by the virtue of it being there, so whoever speaks at it is automatically considered the most important thinker on that subject that exists. And that's what TED does. So last week they had a conference. I guess, yeah, maybe more. And they called it Changing the Way We Eat. So the biggest thinkers in the world came to TED to talk about food and what's going on with how food is produced. And they have a little guide on there about how you can change the way you eat. And what they recommend is a list of 10 things. They want you to educate yourself by reading The Omnivore's Dilemma and Fast Food Nation, the most important books about food. They want you to shop sustainable by buying free-range, pasture-raised, and antibiotic-free products. They want you to ask your farmers at your local farmers market, do you use synthetic fertilizer? They want you to eat less meat because eating meat is not only bad for you, it's bad for the environment. Eating less meat can reduce your chances of developing chronic conditions like some types of cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Biggest thinkers in the world, right? Eat seasonal. Local food has a lesser environmental impact. It's fresher and is produced by your community. That means eating seasonally is healthier for you, your community, and the environment. Then they want you to, if you live in New York in a 10 by 10 apartment, they want you to grow your own. They don't want you to eat out because, the restaurateurs are all buying, GMO food. Don't drink bottled water because of the PET bottles are ending up in landfills. And join groups like Slow Food and the Environmental Working Group. And then at the end they say enjoy because eating should be fun, right? So after they tell you that everything you do is going to kill you, that you should have fun while you're doing it. So I'll just give you an example of two of the people who spoke at this conference, the big thinkers on agriculture. Lori David, who is an environmental activist, producer, and author, she produced An Inconvenient Truth, the Al Gore movie about global warming. She's got a new book out called The Family Dinner, Great Ways to Connect with Your Kids, One Meal at a Time, an inspirational green guide to unplugging and connecting with your family over healthy, fresh food. And she's a trustee of the NRDC. Okay, one of the other speakers was our friend Wayne Pacelli. Who knows who Wayne Pacelli is? Okay, so it's not as scary voodoo picture as I thought it would be. Wayne Pacelli is public enemy #1 for animal agriculture across the United States. He is the single most dangerous person in the United States of America. And I'm not kidding. He is on a mission to eliminate and abolish animal agriculture from this country 100%. He's responsible for Prop 2 in California that banned the egg-laying hens and the farrowing crates from pigs, but I think it was in 2008. So you need to know who he is. And so he has a presentation at the conference where the biggest thinkers in the world about food go, and he says, animals and humans, we're all connected. How did we go from animal husbandry, where farmers cared for their animals, to meat science? From a relationship with living things to treating them like a commodity. Those who abuse animals are likely to abuse other people, and that includes farm workers. The most important people in the world on food. So our problem is we have a problem with public perception. 98% of US population are not farmers. So false perceptions can take root, influencing public opinion. Public opinion can quickly and often does become public policy. And so this is the battle right now, right? How do we keep, how do we keep the freedom to farm? How do we take control of the discussion so that people know that what we're doing is the right thing to do and be able to do it? Because I guarantee you, it's coming to us whether we want to go there or not. Dr. Norman Borlaug, who knows of Norman Borlaug? The world has the technology either available or well advanced in the research pipeline to feed a population of 10 billion people. The more pertinent question today is whether farmers and ranchers will be permitted to use this new technology. And that is a very important statement. But the truth is, no one has a greater stake in good stewardship of the environment and sustainable ag practices than the farmer. The truth is also that productivity drives sustainability, not going backwards. And as an example, the difference between 2007 and 1944 per gallon of milk, dairy farmers used 10% of the land, which is huge, and only 35% of the water. During that same period, the per gallon of milk dairy farming generated only 24% of the manure and 43% of the methane. Even though cows are still, even though it's been refuted by Frank Mitloehner, considered 20% of the cause of global warming worldwide. Also, productivity drives sustainability in farming. In 1930, from 1930 to 2010, we're farming 650% more corn on 13% fewer acres. These are important messages that people need to learn, but Monty's not at TED talking about it, right? So how do we get that? How do we get there? The battleground, what's happening at these TED conferences, them against us, is between large and small farms, specialized, monoculture versus diversified farms, high-tech, versus traditional, and biotech or conventional versus organic. I'm here to say that the future will be driven by coexistence and choice. I say we need both of these systems to have a robust economy and an ag industry that's progressing and moving forward. I think it's good that they're poking at us. It moves us away from this Kodak idea that everything's fine. I mean, the biggest problem with Kodak was that they had such a dominant position, they didn't think they needed a change. They couldn't conceive of the idea that people wouldn't want to buy film or ink from Kodak. But what they didn't understand was that people would just quit buying those things altogether, and it had nothing to do with them. Somebody else created the message and the direction for Kodak, not them. They basically did everything right. So large-scale farms driven by science and technology connected to consumers through global supply chains, we need them to meet the global food demand. And we need small-scale farms connected to consumers through local food networks to keep local rural communities and infrastructure vibrant. Now the middle ground, I believe, is conservation agriculture. I think we're the solution. The people in this room are on the cutting edge of ideas that kind of bring the two things together, that give us a position of being positive environmental stewards and positive environmental activists, but also producing all the food we need to feed the world, which is really the most important thing. So the Center for Food Integrity, which is this think tank run by a guy named Charlie Arnott, put together this idea of a sustainable food system. And it requires three sides of this equation, of this pyramid, to work. It requires me, the farmer, over there on this side, who has to have a system that is economically viable. We need return on, I'm not going to read all that crap. On the other side, the information and the tools that we use to farm need to be scientifically verified. These processes that we use, you know, nutrient management and different kind of new technologies, we need to know that these things work and have benefits. And that's where the university and other research organizations come in. So we need you here in this audience as well. And on the other side, we've got this idea of being ethically grounded. Everything that we do needs to be based on our values. And we're mostly conservative people here, right? We've got conservative values, family values. And most of the people in this country are conservative, family value-oriented people also, even though they may be liberal. But at the end of the day, if it comes down to feeding their kid and what you're putting into their kid, we all share that same value. So how do we communicate that us Bible-clinging gun-toters share the same values as these pot-smoking hippies, right? It seems like a pretty big divide, but it can be done. So how do we get our farmers to disenthrall? How do we get them to give up the guns and Bibles and go on to something new? I'm not asking you to give up your Bible, just by the way. I'm just borrowing a phrase, okay. First,
Heard the NRA.
I have heard the NRA. I'm a member. And I have a Bible, so I can't say much about it. Okay, so first I think to try to promote adoption of these ideas, we need to minimize the chance of failure through education. And one of my probably biggest messages whenever I talk to farmers, every time a farmer asks me about this idea of conservation tillage, I always start with the same thing, which is you have to know every step of this process before you even start. If you can't figure out how you're going to get the water off your field, if you can't figure out how you're going to get the fertilizer in it, if you can't figure out how you're going to manage bugs and weeds, and you know definitively how that's going to happen, and you don't need to relearn because, you know, casi, which means almost in Spanish. So I hope casi goes more than almost. But the casi has the tools and the resources, right? So we need to get it from them. So we need to educate people so that they understand the whole process. So they're not just going out there willy-nilly and trying a practice, you know, a conservation tillage practice like strip tilling in a conventional system, because it doesn't work. I've seen it fail. I've failed doing it. You have to have the whole system. But I think that research is important, but if farmers are unwilling to adopt, the research has no value. You know, and as we go out there and look for money for research, which is pretty much what this organization's about, and even though their motto is all about getting the message out there, we need to look at what kind of money we need to actually get the message to the people, and how do we do it. The worst possible scenario would be that the government adopts the research that CASI and other organizations are doing, and then forces us all to do it, right? That's actually been a concern of mine. You know, a lot of people ask me, because I do a lot of research on my place, there's towers and satellite stuff and lasers and crap out there all the time, and people say, aren't you worried that the work that you're doing is going to turn into a regulation that they're later going to screw us with? And, you know, and my response to that is, they're going to screw us anyway. We might as well have something to say about the information that they're using, right? We need the data so that we can argue our side of the story. I'm kind of proposing here today to the members of the organization that you should consider an online class to teach farmers who want to participate in this kind of process what it's about, and give them the information in a classroom type setting from beginning to end and show them the options. I think that they should train local influencers like dealers and consultants. You know, whenever I go to buy a disc or a strip tiller or something, you know, the guy that I depend on is the guy at the equipment company to tell me what's available and how it works, right? I mean, none of these guys even know how this stuff works. You know, it's a problem, you know, and I don't disagree that farmers teaching farmers is a good way to go, but we don't have enough farmers yet to teach the farmers, right? So, you know, you need to build the supply. So I'd say start with the local guys that are influencers. We also need appropriate economic incentive. There's got to be some way to use conservation grants to incentivize farmers. And there's a lot of different plans out there that allow people to get some money, but they all are kind of set up where they encourage you to fail. And we need to make sure that isn't endemic in the system, that they encourage you to succeed, not fail. I think if you get a conservation grant for this kind of practice, that you should be required to go through the class first to get it, so that we don't just throw away the money. But there's some change coming. I've seen changes. Recently I went to Hawaii for the American Farm Bureau Convention. I was the delegate from California representing us over there. And if you want to see something funny sometime in your life, go to the American Farm Bureau Convention. It's like hee-haw. And I'm not kidding. I mean, it's a good time. It's a good old time there. It's just it's a whole, there's California and then there's everybody else, man. And I can see why they hate us, because they are not us. I hate to be that way, but it is a weird, weird place. So Europe, over the last couple of years, has basically gotten out of the direct payment program because they went broke before us, right? And we're going broke now, so we're getting out of the direct payment business. The Farm Bureau actually dropped this year at the annual meeting with little debate direct payments. The American Farm Bureau said, we understand the country is broke and we are not going to fight to keep direct payments for crops. And that is a massive, massive shift in mentality. I mean, it's impossible for me to describe the previous years when people have fought crying at the microphone to keep direct payments in place. And now it probably has to do with $7 corn, why they don't care anymore, but and $2 cotton. But otherwise, I think they see the writing on the wall. Things have changed. And so when Europe gave up their direct payments, they actually shifted a whole bunch of that money into what they call green payments, conservation payments. So they took a lot of that money that was sitting out there that was in ag, and they took away all the direct payments, but they gave some of it back in forms of conservation incentives. And Shelley, something to consider from Dianne Feinstein's office. So we need to take control of ag and take control of our message. The thinkers in this room need to be the influencers that lead farmers to take control of the conversations. Because if the farmers don't, our competition will. Then we'll all be conservation agriculturalists on their terms and not ours. So I'm going to leave you with a mission. The mission is to provide leadership in building understanding and support that producing the food we need using fewer resources through responsible production, processing, and distribution is the ethical choice that is right for people, animals, and the planet. And we have to decide, are we going to follow the way of the movement of and the thinking of the last century that was dominated by George Eastman and our current way of farming? Or are we going to be visionary futurists like Steve Jobs? And I will leave that up to you to decide.
Additional information about these innovative conservation agriculture systems is available on the Conservation Agriculture Systems Innovation website.